Hello, everybody. Andy Jacob here with the .com magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series. We have a fascinating show today. You watch the show hopefully all the time, and we're always talking about health, and we're talking about personal health, health for society, health for communities. And one thing that oftentimes doesn't get spoken about enough is how important it is for our communities to have good health. I mean, they have to have accessible health. And the better that people are with regard to their health in a community, the better the world is. I mean, society becomes a much better place when we have good health in the communities and we're offering this health to people that need it. So we've been able to invite a leader on the show today. I mean, he's a preeminent expert. His name is Dr. Gene Accius. He, of course, is the president and CEO of Creating Healthier Communities, and they go by CHC, and it's a national nonprofit. And what they're really focused in on is providing and making sure that communities and our society have good health. It's so important. So, Dr. Accius, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Andy, it's a pleasure to be with you, and thank you so much for the opportunity to have a conversation with you and your amazing audience today.
Well, thank you, Gene. And of course, it's great to have you. You're a leader. You're a newly appointed CEO over at the CHC. They were so excited to have you, your background and experience. If I talk about it and all the papers you've written and everything else, I'm going to be here for the full 30 minutes talking about your background. So we're not going to do that. But let's get into it. Before we get started, tell us sort of the high level about Creating Healthy Communities, this national nonprofit, and then we're going to get into it.
Well, absolutely, Andy, and it's exactly what you actually said, that there's a connection between how healthy people are, how healthy their communities are, and how healthy our economies are. So I always say that healthy people means healthier workers, which means healthier businesses, which means a stronger and more resilient economy. And for more than 70 years, we've been on the front lines of addressing the barriers to health. We sit at the intersection of business, government, nonprofit, philanthropy, and actually coalescing all of these different sectors to ensure that people have an opportunity to live a longer, healthier, and more productive life.
Yeah, I love it. It's beautiful. You think about it for the business owners watching the show. If you have employees, what happens when they're sick all the time? What happens when they're not feeling well? Well, we know what happens over the past couple of years, what happens during a pandemic. But in normalized years, if people are not healthy, they can't get to work, they can't create, they can't participate, they can't do what they need to do to serve and feed their families, they can't pay their taxes. The whole thing goes sideways. So let's talk about what CHC is really doing, let's say in the last year, to make a change, because there's so much that you do. But let's just focus on the last year and tell us what the next year looks like.
Absolutely. One of the things at CHC is the fact that we actually work with business and we work with nonprofits, and we actually connect businesses and nonprofits together at the local level to drive systemic change. As you mentioned, Andy, we know that there are literally over $320 billion lost in 2022 because of health disparities, meaning the fact that there are differences in outcomes in how healthy people are able to live. And because of that, that is actually stifling our economic growth. So as an organization, we have been working to actually address the social drivers of health. We have done that, whether it's through our work looking at maternal health, which is a huge issue, particularly in the United States, working in Cleveland, working in Detroit, working in Atlanta, to address this major crisis that faces women, particularly as it relates to maternal health, and disproportionately impact African-American women. We're also working in Atlanta, looking at the areas of vaccination as relates to rural communities, and how do we start to address the issues of cervical cancer and vaccines. These are just two examples of what we're doing, particularly at the local level. Aside from that, we are working with our partners around health literacy to really help communities understand, support, and co-create solutions that put communities at the driver's seat of their own destinies.
Wow, it's interesting. You talk about maternal health. What are we talking about when a woman is pregnant, after she gives birth, or both, or more than what I just mentioned?
It's actually both. There's been significant research and data and evidence that demonstrates that across the spectrum at all levels of socioeconomic status and education status, that there's huge disparities in terms of maternal health as well as infant mortality. And it disproportionately impacts African-American women in particular at a significant rate. Relative to the general population. And what we've been doing is called the Black Birthing Initiative. It's an opportunity to provide early interventions and tools to Black mothers, as well as to interact and engage health systems and other corporations around what we need to do to really close these gaps. And then what are some of the incentives that's in the system that may be perpetuating some of the inequities that we actually see?
Interesting. I'm an old guy, Gene, and when I was a kid, I grew up in the 60s and went to elementary school, went to junior high school, and there really wasn't a lot taught about health. And I'm wondering, is it real important, or is it your position and the position of creating healthier communities, of course, that you have to start ingraining some of this health knowledge into the younger people so that when they grow up, they understand what it's all about and they're not negatively impacted by these healthy choices or the health disparity that you mentioned?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Andy, and I can give you a very concrete example. In Beaufort Jasper, there is a community health center called the Beaufort Jasper Comprehensive Center. About 20, 30 years ago, this county in South Carolina was ranked one of the worst in terms of health care outcomes. Now they're one of the top performing. And we went there to learn, what did they do? And what they did was exactly what you just mentioned. The leadership there at Beaufort Jasper said, you know what, we know when we see a patient come into our patient rooms and they're obese, or they have multiple chronic conditions, or they've been in and out of work because of an illness, that it most likely is impacting an entire household. So how do we start to look at health across all generations? So they partnered with the schools. They started actually doing partnerships with the school systems to educate the kids about healthy eating habits. And what you would imagine is that the kids would go home and say, hey, mom, hey, dad, this is what I learned today in school. And then they took it a step further and started offering different services with parent permission. And the other aspect of this, too, is the fact that these kids started getting more and more interested in health care. So now you have an opportunity where you're increasing the health of the general population in Beaufort Jasper, while at the same time creating a pipeline of potential future healthcare workers.
Wow, I love that. So you start early, they go home, they talk to mom, dad.
It becomes a family. It becomes a family activity. Hey, let's all go for a walk outside. Hey, let's not eat the applesauce and let's eat the apple instead. Or so it becomes a family activity, because some of this is really multi-generational if we're going to address these issues.
And it's driven by the young people. So you take the young people, you help them understand, they bring home the information, and then they impact the older generations. I mean, it's very clever, very, very smart, of course. And you mentioned the vaccines in the rural communities. Let's talk about that, because that's pretty fascinating right now.
Oh, absolutely. This is actually a partnership that we have with one of our amazing partners, Merck. And the idea here is the fact that there's an opportunity to address cervical cancer, and how can we increase vaccination rates, particularly in rural communities, for all population groups at all ages, to reduce this gap. This is, again, thinking about some of the structural issues, particularly that rural communities face, whether it's the number of providers or the number of providers to provide a different type of service. And we're working with our partners, particularly in the Georgia area, to get the right information to the right communities in order to activate and ensure that we're building trust. And that communities understand the trade-offs for these different types of interventions.
Yeah, it makes sense. And you're doing such a good job. And one thing at the CHC, creating healthier communities, that I love is you have a super, what I'll call, high performing team. Yes. So let's talk about that, because you've become integrated into the team. You're now the leader of the team. You're a leader. Corporate culture starts at the top. When you came in and you saw the team there, what was the thing that got you most excited about joining as the CEO of creating healthier communities?
Well, and I would say it's the level of enthusiasm among the staff. I like to say that at CHC, there's not an idea that we don't like. Meaning the fact that folks are extremely energetic, excited, forthcoming with ideas, and that we are an innovative culture. At CHC, we have a 4-day work week. We, in addition to that, really believe in work-life balance. We actually embed that in the work that we do. Staff are off either on a Friday or a Monday. In addition to that, we have, particularly toward the end of the year, we close the entire office for an entire week, so everyone can get time off. And in addition to the hours that they've actually accumulated over the course of the year. Plus, we have a very flexible work arrangement where folks can telework and in many cases remote work. So one of the things we've tried to do, particularly after the last 3 years and with this ongoing pandemic that we're hopefully coming out the end of, is really to be an employer of choice. We've heard from so many companies about the great resignation, the great reset, quiet quitting, and all the different phenomenons. And basically what employers are saying is that for so long, work was the center of their life. And what this pandemic has demonstrated is the fact that there was an opportunity to have work be a part of their life and not necessarily at the center. And what we've tried to do at CHC is really balance that in terms of our social mission, that if we are going to create healthier communities, we have to have a workforce that's healthy. And when we talk about health, we're talking about mental, physical, emotional, all the different elements of health. And how do we walk the talk?
I love it. My wife tells me that I need to not make work the center of my life. So I'm learning something from this interview right now, Gene. Listen, you get invited to all types of forums, whether it's economic forums or other types of, post-COVID work forums in Washington and the like. When you go to the forums, what are the things that you want to impart upon the attendees that they really understand? Like, are there one or two main basic things that you want them to understand about not only what your organization does, but what's needed in the world today?
And I think one is the fact that there is a cost to inaction, meaning the fact that businesses cannot afford to sit on the sidelines and not address the issues of inequity, particularly as it relates to health, to not address the differences in communities, and that it actually costs us and stifles economic growth. And this impacts all populations. So that's the first key message that I like to convey whenever I'm invited to speak at a forum, is that we cannot afford to sit on the sidelines, that every organization, every business, every sector has a responsibility to address the health of the communities, particularly the communities of where they are headquarters, as well as where their employees reside. In the United States in particular, let's use Washington, D.C., since you mentioned Washington. If you're a resident in Georgetown, your life expectancy is 97 years old. If you go down 4 to 5 miles to Anacostia, still in Washington, D.C., your life expectancy is 67. That's nearly a 30-year difference in life expectancy. You're talking about two neighborhoods that are literally less than 10 miles apart. 30-year loss in terms of life.
Interesting.
Huge implications in terms of lost opportunity for families, communities, businesses, and our economy, just because of that. So we can't afford to sit on the sidelines. So that's the first message. The second message is the fact that it really requires collective responsibility between government, business, nonprofits to solve these issues. No one sector can solve them in isolation. And as an organization like CHC, Creating Healthier Communities, that sits at the intersection, we are your thought partner. We are the organization you can turn to in terms of figuring out what solutions are scalable. How do we accelerate the pace of change? How do we bring down the cost of healthcare that impacts businesses in their bottom line? How do we further activate a culture of well-being in the workplace? And that is what CHC actually does. We convene, we connect, we solve, and we elevate and accelerate opportunities so everyone has an opportunity to live a longer, healthier, more productive life.
Wow, I'm not going to make you say that 5 times in a row real fast, but that's fantastic. Now, your focus, your passion, your love is to make healthier communities, and you're a nonprofit. But also there's nonprofits that join your nonprofit in a certain way as a cooperative. Let's talk about that, because that's sort of interesting, the way they pack that together.
Absolutely. So there's 2 ways in which we engage with nonprofits as a nonprofit. One is through our workplace giving efforts. So for nearly 70 years, we have been at the center of workplace giving efforts, working with corporations, working with government, both at the federal and state level, to raise funds for major causes. And in turn, we actually provide those resources to nonprofits across the country. We touch on average about 1,400 to 1,500 nonprofits, and oftentimes as much as 5,000 nonprofits on an annual basis, by providing them with the resources to address the barriers to health. So that's one element. The other element is actually through our Corporate Leadership Council, where we engage more than 50 major corporations around the issues of health, as relates to ESG, as relates to DEI, with the goal of creating an environment where corporate leaders can come together in a safe space to talk about the challenges, but also the opportunities to change their policies, their practices, and their workplace culture in order to achieve some of these health goals. I would encourage your audience to visit us at chcimpact.org with the hope of joining. Whether you're a nonprofit looking to get some additional resources to further advance your mission, or you are a major company looking to provide resources to a trusted nonprofit in a community with respects to a cause that you care so deeply about, we can help serve as that convener as well as that connector.
Yeah, I love it. And you do such a good job. And the resources available online at the website with the blog posts and all the magnificent writing that you and your team put out there for the community to read is very important. Now, I woke up this morning, another article about some major drug problems going on in a particular city. I want to talk about that a little bit. Mm-hmm. What is going on with these drugs? I mean, it just seems like you can't turn on the TV, you can't put on your phone, you can't go on your iPad, you can't read an old-fashioned newspaper without the headline screaming something about drugs decimating people, decimating all the communities. All the communities are becoming decimated. What do we look at from CHC's perspective on what we need to do to clean this up?
Well, that's an excellent question, Andy. I think the question is, what's the root cause? And what we've seen is the fact that the increase in substance and drug abuse has skyrocketed, particularly since the pandemic. And part of that is we have a mental health crisis in this country. This mental health crisis is impacting all populations, all generations, and in many cases, disproportionately impacting the younger generation. When you look at the rate of people who feel as if they're socially isolated and lonely, it disproportionately impacts the younger population. And I think that is one of the root factors as to what we're seeing with regards to widespread substance abuse, which is why at CHC, we have made mental health one of our key pillars of areas of focus. We've actually partnered with an organization called the Steve Fund, which was created specifically to address the mental health and substance abuse issues facing particularly the younger generation. in part because of the fact that we see mental health as a critical area of focus, need, and support across this country. And when we look at life expectancy, going back to my earlier point, one of the things that has been noted is the fact that unlike our counterparts in industrialized countries where life expectancy has been increasing, in the United States, it actually stopped. And some of the reasons that has caused a decline in life expectancy in the United States has to do with what you just mentioned in terms of the widespread drug use.
Wow, that's crazy. Let's think about it, because I hear people talk, I read different articles. We're talking about the drugs. You mentioned the mental health problems and issues and challenges, especially with the young people. Let's talk about the homeless just for a minute, because I hear this debate that it's the drugs that are driving the homelessness. I hear other people say they're homeless because they can't afford a home. I hear other people say, well, they're mentally ill. Then they go on the drugs, and now they're a mentally ill drug user, versus someone that started drugs, then became mentally ill, versus someone that lost their home and then went on the street and then started drugs and then became mentally ill, or vice versa. From your perspective, I know that was a long comment, and I don't mean to laugh about such a serious issue, because it is, but where do you stand? Where's your thought process with this problem, and what can we do to fix it?
Well, I think, Andy, there's a huge variation in terms of exactly what's the causality. I think there's a correlation, but it's very difficult to say what is causing what, whether it's the chicken or the egg. What we do know is the fact that over the last several years, there's been a lot of pressures and stressors on households across this country. And there's been a cumulative effect, a compounding effect. And when you take into account the polarization, when you take into account the challenges and the increase in equity, when you take into account some of the social unrest, when you take into account a host of factors, we really do need to start, particularly at the community level. And part of starting at the community level is to approach communities from a position of them being an asset rather than a liability, and really taking the time to listen. One of my favorite quotes is from Brian Stevenson, and Brian, who's the president and CEO of the Equal Justice Initiative and author of Just Mercy, says that you cannot become an effective problem solver from a distance. There are nuances and details you will miss unless you get close. And I think whether you're talking about someone who's homeless, whether you're talking about someone who has an addiction, or whether you're talking about someone who is having a mental crisis, that we as a country, as leaders in business and nonprofit and government, have to get close. And we have to get close by first listening. And then we listen from a position of empathy and a position of viewing what you're hearing from a position that individual has strengths rather than weaknesses. And then to start to co-create solutions. No community wants to know what their problems are, because frankly, they already know. What they do want to do is to be in the driver's seat of co-creating those solutions and driving those solutions. And that's what we do at Key, creating healthier communities, is to bring together sectors and leaders and get them close enough to hear what the communities have to say, close enough for them to understand what the communities want and need, close enough to co-create solutions to ensure that we are addressing the challenges that are facing our communities in a very meaningful and intentional way.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a key for me. Is you said they want to co-drive it. They want to drive the car. They want to be part of it. They want to make the solutions, but then drive the car for the solutions to take them to the place they want to be. It's fantastic. Now, before I let you go, we've only cut out a certain amount of time. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Andy.
We have entrepreneurs that watch the show. I think this is going to be kind of fun for you, because you're an entrepreneur as well. You're a CEO. You're running a business. It's a nonprofit, but it's a business. For the younger entrepreneurs watching the show that are maybe having a tough time in their business, maybe based on your background and experience, you can share some thoughts about what it takes to keep on pushing when the going gets tough, and keep on moving forward.
Mm-hmm. I would say this, Andy. One is never give up. Never give up. And the second is, what product or service are you creating to solve what problem? What product or service are you creating to solve what problem? If you frame your strategies around solving a problem, then you're more likely to stick with it when the going gets tough. And you will see the rewards of your hard work from time to time because you are focused on something much bigger and larger than yourself. It doesn't mean that each day will be rosy. It doesn't mean that each day you'll wake up and the sun will be shining. But what it does mean is the fact that you are focused on solving an issue that is much larger than yourself. And that is what drives you each and every day.
Wow. Spoken like a true scholar, Dr. Accius. I love it so much. Wow. Well, listen, the time has flown by. We're going to bring you back on the show because I want to talk more about your team. I want to talk about mentorship. I think that's important to touch on. But for now, thank you so much for bringing us inside, creating healthier communities, talking about everything that you're doing. And there's a lot more that you're doing as well. And for the people that want to check it out, go to the website. It's such a great, great website with so many things to read and so many offerings. It's just remarkable what you've done over there. So thank you so much for coming on the .com Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series today.
Thank you so much, Andy.